Good evening, and thank you for joining us. It's my pleasure to welcome Jason Pickleman for the last artist lecture of our season. I'm Bianca Bova, Associate Curator for Sculpture Milwaukee. Jason Pickleman, one of our exhibiting artists this year for the 2021-2022 exhibition. Jason is known in Chicago and beyond as many things. He is a curator and a gallerist, an art collector. He is a graphic designer and the proprietor of J&L Graphic Design, and he is, of course, an artist. This evening's lecture will focus on Jason's art practice and the work he has made in the last 30 years. We're broadcasting this evening from Jason's studio, which is in a beautiful early 20th century decommissioned post office in Chicago's River North neighborhood. So thank you, Jason, for hosting us here, and I will turn it over to you to show us some work.
Thank you, Bianca. Happy to be in my studio, happy to have people here. And I did pull out a ton of things, which will just sort of be an overview of what I've been doing for 30 plus years. We're going to start with monochrome paintings.
Yes, so Jason has throughout his career returned to painting from time to time. And this is a series of work that was from, I believe, the early 2000s.
Yeah, these were, I call these monochrome paintings. I was trying to relearn how to paint. And I didn't really want to, have to paint a picture of something. I wasn't really interested in images of things, pictures, representations of things. I was really kind of wanting to make the paint, the picture. So you can see that it's incredibly thick, very dimensional. They're made with oil paint, wax, and a lot of time. Each one probably took a year, maybe 2 years to make.
Within that series, there are works that do have objects embedded in the paint. Think of a couple that have what look to be fabric or pieces of cloth, maybe cut from garments, and one that has a bra strap embedded in it, sort of a flesh tone painting.
Yeah.
As you were starting to incorporate other materials, it does feel a little bit bodily while still remaining very abstract. At what point did you start to introduce material in the paint?
I guess the material really began with the bra strap painting. Come over here. That's a bra strap. And it stops there. That's painted. So sort of a painted line or painted shadow. Obviously, I was thinking of Barnett Newman sit paintings. I'd recently seen a photo of Barnett Newman dancing with Helen Frankenthal
The World's Fair.
at the World's Fair. I think it was in 1964.
Sure, many of you are familiar with the image he's referencing.
And so I take my references both literally and humorously. I kind of thought I would make more of these paintings, but once I make or solve a painting, I sometimes feel as though there's no need to make another one. At one point, I thought I'd make a whole series of these paintings, but really, this one's fine. This solves everything I needed it to solve. So that series is done. I made probably maybe 8 to 10 monochrome paintings in the early aughts. And I kind of got it out of my system.
Sometimes that works. There's another series of your paintings that I think were some of your earliest works in general, which are the prefix and suffix paintings. And those are really kind of where we see the original introduction of language into your work,
Yeah.
which becomes a recurrent theme that we see up in the work that you're making now.
Yeah, the prefix and suffix paintings are exactly that. They're small language-based paintings that have a bisected canvas. They're small. They're maybe 8 inches by 18 inches. That, as you can see, have very painterly marks. I was very inspired by abstract expressionism, Clifford Still, particularly at the time. but I was also very much involved in a kind of Chicago-based conceptualist group, people like Kay Rosen, Tony Tassett, Hirsch Perlman, many of them who were using language, Kay Rosen specifically. And she very much influenced and inspired this series of paintings. That one is Ism. Here's Bai. I love Bai.
And so in adapting that use of language and that marriage of language and abstraction, what was it that made you to use these kind of open-ended or abstract versions of language? Because these are words that, or parts of speech or parts of language that are inherently abstract. It can mean many things, can have many applications. It can't stand on its own.
Well, same way that the painting can't really stand on its own. The painting could be read as many different things, many different ways. I think more importantly for me is these were a series of paintings that really my first series of paintings. I really just wanted to know what paint does. What can paint do? How does it move? How does it get out of the tube onto this canvas? How does it hit the edge of the canvas? How does it show through? How does it dry? How does it not dry? The blending, I was trying to teach myself a little bit about mixing of color. And then I was also beginning my career as a graphic designer. So I was really starting to think about typography. This is obviously Courier or American typewriter, but that's all hand painted. And being very conscious of the letter spacing, the kerning in the letter forms, and the space between the smoothed out panel and the abstract panel. So really, I think this series was really all about me learning how to be a painter, to see if I wanted to. I wanted to be a painter. Did I want to be a painter? I do want to show one other one. This was the last one I made of this series-ish. But I felt like in the paint handling, I solved everything I wanted to solve. Let's see if we can get it in focus. There we go. I thought the paint handling was very professionally done, very conscious about the marks on top, the marks on the bottom, the color contrast.
So you talk about these as being kind of experimental or very material-driven or form-driven works. It always seems like there are these human elements that creep in, if that's the bra straps or the fabric, if it's language, if it's something communicative, which brings me to one of, it's no secret I'm a fan of your work, but one of my favorite paintings or one of my favorite works that you've ever made, which I think is around here, which is the only one of these works that is figurative.
Yeah.
So I'd love for you to show that.
Sure. After I finished that, the ish painting, I decided that I was probably done. And so this was the last painting in the series. Again, I felt like the paint, the abstract marks were completely resolved as mark making gestures go. And the illustration, I believe it came from a cartoonist named Berenstein, of these three people aghast, looking at my mark making, was a nice sort of closure to the series. So this was 1989. I started them, I think, in 88. Did it for about 2 years, made about 12 of them, and didn't feel like I needed to do a 13th. It's kind of very typical of the whole 30-year studio practice. I'm still looking for that thread, the thing that ties all of these things together. Maybe you'll figure it out for me. Maybe we'll figure it out during the course of this conversation. But painting is definitely one of these things I keep going back to.
Painting and language, it seems, because much more recent series of work that you've been actively making in the last year is the Taser works. And that starts with 2 paintings.
It does. The taser paintings, I didn't print out the mache. Taser paintings are,
And there are two of these that are identical that are typically shown one next to the other.
yes. Again, you'll notice there is a very kind of thickly applied painted surface. It's not so flat. I did try to very much show the kind of process of painting. But the thing about the taser paintings, or taser paintings, is that they're based on a painting by Ed Ruscha from the early 60s, which recently sold for 20 some odd $million, which might have been the thing that catapulted the series in some respects. So Ed made a painting in the exact same format, blue rectangle on the yellow rectangle on top with a white line bisecting it with this very condensed Cooper black typography with a black outline with a red fill. But his didn't say taser, obviously. Tasers didn't even exist, the gun tasers. His said the word Annie, as in Little Orphan Annie, the cartoon character, the Broadway play character. So just like this, Annie. And granted, Ed made the painting before I was born, so he's of a different generation. But the word Annie never really captivated my imagination. And I read somewhere when someone asked Ed, why Annie? He said something to the effect that when words get hot, he becomes interested in them. And when I heard that, when words become hot, and it occurred to me, maybe generationally, mind you, maybe that's my generational prejudice, but the word Annie is not a hot word, at least to my generation, probably to your generation as well. And it was at about that time that we were going through a lot of civil uprising and civil unrest and a lot of confrontation with policing. And there was an incident outside of Minneapolis, in the Minneapolis suburbs, where a police officer shot and killed an unarmed person with a taser, screaming, taser, taser, taser. And it was hearing that where I thought, taser, that's a very hot word. So that's the origin of the taser series. I've made a couple of these. I've made them as a lawn sign.
You may have seen these works crop up around Chicago if you were in the area as lawn signs, also as an almost commercial form of graffiti. You might see them crop up on vacant storefronts in vinyl. It's giving away any secrets.
This one's really big. It's so big it doesn't even fit on the screen.
And this is vinyl, not a painting, yes.
Right. So scale is something I'm really interested in. It's something that is paramount in everything I make. Everything. Scale is one of my mediums.
You do use scale a lot, and you do change scale within series of works quite often. You also pull from a very wide range of references, many of which are kind of explicitly art historical. And I wonder if, before we move on to the next work, if you would talk a little bit about that, because these threads that we see, this art historical frame of reference, the use of language, this kind of this towing of the line between abstraction and something more bodily or vernacular. These are kind of the threads that are coming together even from the early works, and we've just seen that kind of in relief between the taser paintings and the prefix suffix paintings. But to look, before we look a little bit more closely at language, we can talk a little bit more about those art historical references.
Well, sure. I mean, everything that I make is made with a little voice in the back of my head. When I'm working, say, in neon, for example, I'm thinking about light. I'm thinking about glow. I think about, Flavin, for example, even though he uses fluorescent tubes primarily, famously. But glow becomes kind of one of those things that is very important. I mentioned Kay Rosen and her use of language, but then people like Joseph Kosuth, or Lawrence Weiner, who made language the primary aspect of their practice, are things that are always in my head. Probably no different than any musician, for example, who, if I was a saxophonist, for example, I'd probably have certain melodies, like Charlie Parker's melody in my head, this kind of phrasing in my head. Or if I was a trumpet player, Chet Baker would be someone whose kind of softness and breathiness would be in my head. So I guess when it comes to art history, I have a similar relationship to hundreds of artists who are my whisperers. And probably I guess you could say they're my silent mentors.
And you do make explicit reference, but you also work very collaboratively. And as you mentioned, you come out of a tradition and a generation in Chicago in the 80s and 90s of a very strong conceptual art moment that is really still identified readily with the city and is identified in your peer group and with the artists that you work with. And one of those artists is Tony Tassett. And Tony has also been an exhibiting artist with Sculpture Milwaukee. You guys probably remember his blob monster quite well. That's the one. I will also say there's a lovely exchange between Jason and Lawrence Weiner in our catalog, which just came out, which Jason also designed, which as a dialogue between artists concerned with language, I think is really one of the highlights of that publication, which I encourage you to look at if you pick up the book. But for Tony Tassett, the two of you have been peers and contemporaries for many years and collaborators and close friends for many years. And recently you did a collaboration, which I think we have on hand to help you with, which does allow that extension of language, which also starts to touch on commercialism and design a little bit more. So these are pit jackets, racing jackets, the kind that racing crews would wear. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, Tony and I came up with this idea that we would make these pit jackets or racing jackets with logos of bankrupt companies, Blockbuster, Lehman Brothers, Tower Records, Dominic's, Radio Shack, Enron, Pan Am, Toys R Us. I really like the idea of graphic design that's wearable, usable. Yeah.
Very attractive jacket.
I have to say, the last person to model one of these was Lauren Whittles, one of our favorite gallerists, just recently moved to Chicago. Welcome back, Lauren. She was wearing one of the pit jackets at Expo Chicago. And boy, did she look great.
Lauren is an excellent model for many fashions.
So these were made, I think we had 5 different styles, 5 different designs. And we did small, medium, large, extra large. And Tony's gallerist, Kavi Gupta, who represents Tony, was the one managing the edition and all sales are going through Kavi Gupta. Let's hope he sells many of them. Let's hope he sells all of them. That's the pit jacket.
So when you started collaborating on these with Tony, the impetus was obviously to use the pit jacket and the form of sponsorship that you see on something like a racing jacket. And to address that with bankrupt companies, obviously it looks at a number of things, but one of those is very much a moment in time. What is in business, what is out of business, what is operational, what is present in the culture, what is, as you said before, maybe generational. Someone of my generation certainly knows what Blockbuster is. I don't know if the Gen Z kid knows what Enron is. So if you could talk a little bit more about what that means as a moment in time and where that comes into, again, language and design and the intersection of these things. It's cultural icon.
Well, what's so interesting is when I do wear one of the pit jackets around town, it always solicits reactions, and it is generational. People, older people, will see Enron, which was an incredibly ill-run financial energy company, and lost billions and billions of dollars, bilked many people out of their entire savings, pensions, etc. The young kids today, you're right, don't know what Enron is, but people have come up to me on the street and be like, "Oh, I remember Enron."
I had someone who seemed rather intoxicated shout, "Did you work at Enron?" at me when I was wearing that jacket walking down Lawrence Avenue once.
Mhm.
So I can attest to that.
I'm not sure I answered your question. As a graphic designer, I make logos, and it's interesting to think that a logo can be retired, can serve its use, and be cast aside. On many of the logos, I left the copyright symbol, the R with a circle or the C with a circle, intentionally on the jackets. If we're going to get sued, we might as well be completely deliberate about what we did. And yes, we did not ask permission to use any of those materials. Keep waiting for that cease and desist letter.
I think that's going to Kavi and not you and Tony, luckily.
That's great.
You do collaborate from time to time, and I do want to bring up another collaboration with another artist of similar generation, and that is Theaster, who's also one of the curators, along with Michelle Grabner, of There Is This Me, which is the exhibition that Jason's work appears in the sculpture Milwaukee. And the two of you have collaborated quite closely on a number of works. I think most notably work that was drawn from the Johnson Publishing Archive, which Theaster and his organization acquired a number of years ago, 5 years ago now, I want to say. And I think the image that comes to mind the most readily is the one that was on the cover of Art in America, I think in September of 2019.
I think I have it.
I believe. But the Johnson Publishing Archive is a monumental archive of Black American advertising and publishing images. So you can talk a little bit more about how you and Theaster came to work together on that and the other projects you worked together on.
Well, I have to. I was amazed when I saw this image on the cover of Art in America.
It's always pleasant.
Yeah, I had no idea that this was going to end up here like this. So the image is a black and white image from the archive. And Theaster and I, through many conversations, came up with what I guess you would call graphic symbolism that was collaged and layered digitally on top of these vintage photographs. We probably created 50, 100 of them. They were published in a book called Black Madonna Press. And one of them was chosen by Art in America for the cover of the magazine, which was a shocking thing to see. I love the cruciform overlay of this kind of very elegant, statuesque Black woman in this fantastic dress, transformed almost into a cross between a Christ-like figure and a Madonna figure. But Theaster and I worked very collaboratively on all these things. He's an excellent editor, I mean, an incredible editor, and he's a great partner, giving people he works with that perfect balance between allowing us to add things to the table and creating a dialogue where things can get taken away, things can get added and taken away and added, remixed. I mean, this really is a collage, is what it is. And collage is part of my practice that has been steady for 30 plus years. I always have magazines that I'm cutting up and rearranging, recomposing. Collage has been real useful to me because sometimes painting can get real messy. Kind of oil painting can get a little smelly, especially if you're doing it at home, as I often was. There were times when my wife would be like, "Can you put the paints away?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, I'll put them away. I'll start collaging." And then all of a sudden, the dining room table is full of magazines and adhesive tape, and there's little bits of paper all over the apartment. So we should look at some collages.
We should look at some collages. And I want to talk, since we were talking about the pit jackets and this use of retired logos and this kind of sense of things that might be thrown away or things that are part of the commercial culture that we don't necessarily assign a high value to, there's a series of collage works you've been making for a good number of years now, which I think are referred to as the junk mail collages, which are a personal favorite of mine. And this sees images of contemporary art or modern art collaged with junk mail that you received here at the studio method home.
Yeah.
You can show us some examples of that.
Sure. The junk mail collages are almost all 8.5 by 11 or 8.5 by 14. It's kind of coming here. You can see this one's from American Express. Yeah, I'm always getting solicitations from insurance companies, mortgage companies, credit card companies. And so I've been placing modernist paintings. Not always much, sometimes impressionist paintings. There was a small series where I was using Bosch. And there was another one when Piero della Francesca, there was another series. So not always modernist, but always junk mail.
I'm interested in where you source the art images, because I think
Here's
some of them do come from things like auction catalogs, which are effectively junk mail of the art world.
There'd be
Things that don't have
Picasso.
long shelf life.
On we've all seen these, lower your rate. They send you these checks. Why would they send you these checks in the mail? What if somebody steals your mail and like fills out one of these checks with your name on it? This one's 8.5 by 14. And occasionally I'll use a gas bill. This is Renoir. Junk mail with Renoir. I almost always turn the junk mail upside down.
So about legibility.
It's about thwarting legibility, and thwarting legibility is something I go back to again and again as an artist. When I want to be incredibly specific, as in like the taser paintings, I want my language to be razor sharp. I want no mistake. This is what it is. This is what it says. I think you know what it means. And it's going to have an attitude. It's going to have a tone. And the legibility of that is part of the entire package of what the artwork is. However, like my interest in abstract painting and that sort of blurriness of what abstract painting means, I also like the idea that language, which is a meaning-making system, can be pulled apart and can be chopped and rearranged, and maybe in a Dadaist way, destroyed down to a formal level wherein letter forms are no longer legible as words. They may be purely line, circles, horizontal lines, vertical lines. And I think my neon work, some of my neon work, does that exactly.
Your neon work does that very explicitly. But it also brings to mind, and this is a bit of the jump that we can get back to later, of another notable public artwork of yours, which is the Montrose Brown Line Station for the Chicago Transit Authority.
Yeah, let's
So-
talk about that.
For those of you that are familiar with the CTA, if you've ever taken the training from Montrose, the CTA is a very robust public art program with artist design stations on every line. There's an excellent coffee table book about this, which Jason also designed. The Montrose Brown Line Station, Jason, you designed, remind me, about 6 or 7 years ago?
Oh, no, I
Longer
think,
ago than that?
I think it was in 2005.
So this is the interior of the station. This is the wall that you would see as you, after you've crossed into the turnstiles and just as you're about to go up the stairs to the elevated platform. These are our aluminum letter forms.
Yeah, they are
Yes.
aluminum.
So talking about legibility and the abstraction of language, at first glance, it's very difficult to discern, especially since this is a space that you are inherently moving through. So as I said, you go through those turnstiles up the stairs. This is not a space where many people are inclined to pause or where stopping dead in your tracks is very welcome for that matter. It's a high traffic area. So can you talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
the decision to
So,
render some of what is there legible?
yeah, the words, the letters actually spell out local or neighboring street names. So let's start here. Here, WOLCOTT, Walcott, and it gets repeated, Walcott, Walcott, Walcott. Then it goes Windsor, 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 Windsor. Funny, I hadn't thought about like
The repetition.
Windsor, Windsor, Taser, Taser. Warner here. Warner, Honore, 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 Paulina, Levitt, Oakley. And the grid of the tile becomes sort of like a structuring element for these words that are, I admit, difficult to read, intentionally difficult to read, but in some respects, kind of boring. Like, who wants to like just make art out of the names of the streets? It's an easy conceit, and it was a conceit I'm sure that absolutely won me the commission, which I'm happy about. And I found a way to engage the selection committee with an idea that respected the neighborhood, but I also think that I ennobled the neighborhood with these streets and made them kind of artful and fun, creative and clever without being pedantic or repetitious. I think most people walk through the Montrose station and don't actually read the names of the street: Ashland, Warner, Oakley. I think they sense just this overall kind of like crossword puzzle jumble of composed letter forms.
Do you think it has a locus in the neighborhood though? Because if those are the streets in your neighborhood, those are street names that you recognize. And if you're familiar with that language and that location, you're going to see it and read it much more readily than someone who's a tourist who happens to get off in Montrose that day. So there is kind of an intimacy that it creates for the neighborhood, for that being your train station, which is in many ways, I think, a central aspect of a lot, or a defining geographic aspect of a lot of Chicago neighborhoods is what is your train station, what is your train line? The Brown line being a very good one to be on. I'm also interested in the way that the tile appears in that work, because that's tile that you see in many CTA stations, and it's very unremarkable and easy to clean, and I think that's probably its greatest attribute. But in your work, it always, for me, even before I knew that was your work, even before I knew you, but I knew that work, it always reminds me of Silhouette. And I don't know what it is, about that, about the way that you've layered the letter forms that really conjures that grid in a way that to me has always screamed of Silhouette.
Well, Lewitt is one of my idols, and I will say, I wasn't thinking about Lewitt specifically when I was doing this work, but obviously he was a whisperer in my ear. Since we're talking about Lewitt, I might as well bring it up. I did do a performance wherein I painted one of Saul Lewitt's most important, most iconic wall works, lines in 4 directions, and then painted it out completely. That was fun.
And that was done on the center wall of Lawrence and Clark, which was a collection gallery that you ran with some assistance occasionally for 5 years at the corner of Lawrence and Clark in Chicago's Uptown neighborhood. And that housed your collection more or less in rotation.
I had this idea in 2015 that the collection of artworks that I had acquired, because I am kind of a voracious art collector as well as an art maker, was just sort of existing in my house and in my studio. And my wife and I are pretty private people. We don't have people over that much. That it would be nice if the artwork actually had another audience, if the artwork could create a buzz the same way that when I first saw the work and felt so enamored with the work that I needed to own it and plop down the money for it, that obviously the work was doing this thing, you know, screaming at me, talking to me, creating a relationship with me. And then I sequestered that feeling in my home or in my studio. I thought if I had a gallery, I brought the artwork that was in my home to the studio or to the gallery, then maybe the work could be revitalized. Not that it ever lost its buzz, but that I would be able to share that buzz again with another audience. That was the reason to run the gallery, open the gallery. The gallery evolved. I brought in hundreds of artworks, many hundreds of artworks over the 5-year period. And I even gave a few artists solo shows. The Loyola Condenser being one of the first. Lisa Ferenz, the artist of the Condenser Project, got in a second show. Aaron Gent, one of my good friends, gave him a show. We did a mail art show.
Annually?
An open call solicitation for mail art, which then had a revival during the 2020 pandemic lockdown and stay-at-home orders, which I then shared via Zoom or Instagram.
Instagram Live.
I did it on Instagram.
And in partnership with the Ray Johnson estate, because I believe we also had a talk then with Francis Beatty.
Absolutely.
Real moment in time for everyone.
But we have digressed.
We have. We could spend an hour on Lawrence and Clark and not scratch the surface, but suffice to say, it functioned as a house for the collection and as a kind of clubhouse for everyone who visited. We were talking about collage. And actually, I think this is an excellent moment to jump to a few of the Q&As since we do have a number of them coming in. We'll say there is a Q&A button. If you have questions, please feel free to ask now or at the end of the program, anytime you wish. The first is actually about this right here. Someone asked me about the work behind us. This is not your work. This is the work of a conceptual artist named Puppies. The works behind that, however, I believe are yours. And I believe that the Puppies is actually seated on an additional sculpture. I don't remember the artist of that sculpture,
Yeah,
but I do believe
it's a table.
It's a table.
It's a table. What makes a table a sculpture?
Whether or not there's another one sitting on top of it.
Puppies is one of my favorite artists, and I own, I don't know, 7 or 8 sculptures or works by Puppies. And I thought it'd be fun to have a little color and glow during this talk. Give a shout out to one of my favorite artists. But the works behind us, the Tondo circular painting behind Bianca was a proposal I painted for the John Hancock building. I was up for a commission to do a 12-foot painting in their lobby, like on the 40th floor or something like that. So that was the proposal painting for that commission, which I did not receive. So, but I did get a really nice maquette out of it, and I love it. And the silver Mylar piece here was another commercial project that I made at the very beginning, at the birth of Expo Chicago. A
you would briefly explain your relationship to Expo Chicago, because you really are one of the core members of that team.
I'm an early member of the team. I'm the graphic designer for Expo Chicago. Expo, as most of you know, is an international art fair that takes place in Chicago. We've just completed our 9th edition. During the first year of promoting the fair, we hadn't done the fair before. We had no photographs, we had no images, we didn't have any art. We didn't want to use a gallery's artist. So I made this thing and photographed this thing. And this is what we used to promote the first year of the fair. And at first I didn't really think of it as a piece of art, but over the last 10 years, it's become kind of a talisman for me. And it's shown me that I make art even when I'm not thinking that I'm making art, and that the things I make have multiple lives and multiple purposes. And this is an excellent example. Same thing, the Tondo is also an excellent example.
That is one of my favorite objects in your studio. And I remember the first time I visited here, and this is a lofted space. We're up on the 2nd floor, wall to wall, floor to ceiling, and sometimes stacked on the floor, sometimes stacked on top of itself. There is art in here. There are racks that are full. You said there's every wall conceivably full. There is not a flat surface in here other than, I think, your desktop that does not have art on it.
There's art on my desktop. There's a sterling ruby on my desktop.
Is a sterling ruby on your desktop? Would you like to show that?
Sure, why not?
I don't think we're going to get censored for it. You were an early collector of sterling ruby. You
Yeah.
had, I think sterling
One of
was
his
your
first.
first works out of graduate school, didn't you?
Sterling ruby.
Sterling ruby.
It's a
This is a fake plant.
marijuana plant. I think it's from 2002. It's I think an edition of 8 or 10. I don't know if it says it under here. No, 2003.
There you go.
I know Eric May has one.
Very
So-
good company.
His, I think, is in a little less good condition as mine. Mine's in mint condition.
Most things here are. Before I digress further into the collecting habit, our friend David Salkin has a question.
Oh.
David says your artwork that has text is beautifully designed graphically.
Thanks, David.
Where is the threshold for you between design and art? Someone had to ask it. Naturally, it's David. Thank you, David.
We tried so hard not to talk about
We're
this.
not going to discuss this, but thank you, David.
We're going to talk about
We'll
it.
talk about it just for you.
We will. What's the question again?
Where is the line between design and art for you? And also, how much time do you have, David?
The line is not something that I draw, but something that creeps up. As I was kind of explaining with this work here, I make things, how should I say? I often come into the studio with a commercial project. Get into the studio at 9 o'clock every morning. I've got to make JPEGs, I got to make banner ads, and I got to make a logo, and I have to make a catalog, and I got to make an invitation. I got to make a sign. And in doing all that stuff, sometimes I just throw things against the wall. And I think out of that, throwing against the wall, a lot of my favorite artwork happens. And I'll pull out one more. I love this thing so much.
This is one of my favorite sculptures of yours.
I love this sculpture. I gotta get it on white. I'm good here. Gotta see it on white. I just love this thing.
By the way, David says deal with it.
This has everything that I was doing at the time commercially. Everything from spray paint to neon clips to some fabric to some joinery, the screws sticking out of the back of it. It's like a little trophy. I think of this as like a trophy of my commercial work. And even though it's very, looks like detritus, torn, ripped, frayed, akimbo and askew. All of those decisions, all of those moves speak to me about the art making practice. And when I can make something like this that is so free of a finished idea, finished product, and this is where I might answer David's question. Design is about coming up with the finished solution, the finished communication. My artwork tends to kind of flounder a bit in the process. My favorite artwork. I love the process of this. I love the process of painting the texture of this. I love the process of painting out the Lewitt. It takes a real freedom to destroy and to rearrange to the point where things might fall apart. And that is very antagonistic to quote unquote good design.
I think that more than answers the question.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, Jason. We do have a couple more questions, one of which I think fits into the conversation very well here. This is from Amir Badri.
Oh, Amir.
Old neighbor at Lawrence and Clark.
Hi, Amir. Let me just say this. Amir, thank you for all your letters. Every time one arrives, I do receive it. I read it many times, and I want to thank you specifically. He writes me these really long letters.
Writes me letters.
They're
Amir,
great
you're an
letters.
excellent pen pal, and you were always a good neighbor. Amir says, do you go into making a collage with an idea, or do you let your subconscious bubble up through how you orient the elements you collage together? I will also note, I believe Amir had at least one collage on view at Lawrence and Clark.
That's right. I gave him his first show.
Artist to artist.
Yeah. I let the ideas bubble up. Collage specifically, I don't really. Images speak to me. And sometimes images call out to be treated, manipulated, cut up, rearranged. For example, in these works.
These are magazine collages that you've been making since
Oh gosh.
the 80s?
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah, I've made hundreds of these.
They're
So this is a fashion magazine, fashion photograph. I don't know who it is. I don't know who took the photo. It doesn't matter to me. But what I was really captivated by was the foliage in which the model was sitting. So I got 20 copies of the magazine and just cut out other pieces of that foliage and started gluing it on top of the figure in facing, well, to create like a triptych, so to speak. It's the same photograph. It's sort of like low-tech Photoshop cloning, but I just do it with pieces of paper. I'll show you another example.
So the magazines that you're using, they're fashion magazines, or I think some of these come from kind of the pre-magazines you take out of the box or you find in the lobby of particularly nice apartment buildings.
Yeah.
When it comes to source material,
There's one.
is this again to me always goes back to scale. You look at these and they read to some extent as magazine image because you know what the correct scale of the magazine image is. And this goes back into the junk mail and your work with Tony and this idea of almost inverting this pop art sensibility where you're obscuring the thing which is maybe the most recognizable about the form.
Yeah, there's a figure in here. You can see the hard lines.
There's another work in that series that I love, which I think is 4 panels.
Yeah, all right, I'll show you that.
But again, this use of the figure and obscuring the figure and even playing within this particular series a convention of landscape.
So this starts with a very conventional photograph of a guy showing off probably a jacket or a scarf or something. I don't know what's for sale. It doesn't really matter to me. But what interested me in this image was the cliff. And at the time I was doing a lot of hiking in the mountains of New Mexico. And I was very aware of erosion. So I started taking the same photo and taking out the figure and adding to the cliff. Oh, it's the same image, the same photo, and I'm just extending the cliff, kind of playing with geological time. There's a third one.
There is, I think, especially present in this series of work, a cleanliness to the way that you collage. I saw these works on the wall, I believe at Lawrence and Clark, and saw them many, many times before I looked closely enough to realize their collage, because they really do read as image. And where the junk mail collages are very explicitly about layering, or the works that you've done with Theaster are very explicitly about layering. I'm interested in where in these works it becomes more about addition or subtraction.
Very much about the balance between both of those things. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Ah.
And again, when we talk about scale in your work, there are panel collages as well, which deal with addition, subtraction, abstraction of the body, but on a much larger and almost more commercial scale in terms of material, because these are collages, they're not paintings. But they are taking from their source material something entirely different.
Yeah, this is a large scale collage. This is 2011. It started off as a photograph of Ernest Hemingway on a dock with a large sailfish with fin of a big catch in the ocean. And I just kept cutting out Ernest Hemingway and his comrades so that all was left is this one almost abstract swoosh. It's got a beautiful Ben-Day dot to it. But here you can start to see the collage elements.
And that's an enlarged image that you had produced.
Yeah, look how cool that is. Some really good moments in here. Look at this one right there. Super subtle. Haven't made too many of this. Again, it's like after I make one and I'm successful,
So
I'm like,
there's
okay, I'm done, figured it out, move on.
We have another question, and then I promise we have several questions that are relating to the hand art, and I promise we will talk about the work that's on view in Sculpture Milwaukee. But first, we have a question from Jacqueline Serdell. Thank you, Jacqueline. It says, thanks for the generous talk. You talk about your interest in primary colors, your interest in neon. You should talk about the neon works. Do you feel that living and working in Chicago has affected your work and your practice? If so, how? And I think you did touch on that a little bit, talking about generationally, the tradition you come from in Chicago.
Wasn't that like 4 questions?
That was like 4 questions. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Jackie.
But I do want to talk about the neon work, but I think Jacqueline brings up an interesting question with your use of primary colors, because we see it sometimes born out of reference to things like the Taser paintings. But it is something that you do work sometimes in a rather restricted palette, or a palette that is dictated by the source material.
I like artwork that has wall power, that has graphic punch, and primary colors absolutely have that. If you work in a program like InDesign, for example, which I do almost exclusively, when you open up a new document, primary colors are default setting in your color palette. So the first thing I see when I walk into the studio every morning are primary colors. So it's probably in my brain. But there are a reason why things like stop signs are red and white, or school buses are yellow and black. These are high contrast, highly visible color combinations for very important social and civic circumstances. You wouldn't want a stop sign to be in a soft pink or in a existing with two colors that don't have great contrast. And I think, as a commercial graphic designer, also, I try to make my work really kind of scream. And am I allowed to show something?
Yeah, sure. It's your talk.
Okay.
So for those of you who are not aware,
Like
one of Jason's great
Like this, for example. Like, I designed this. That thing screams. The pink, the blue, the green, the typography.
there's an iconic quality to it.
That's pretty good. I like to think that there's not a lot of difference between this and this. I could be wrong about this.
I don't think you are.
But the guy that made this is the same guy that's making this. And I'm doing this at 9 a.m. and I'm doing this at 9 p.m. But it's not like one thing switches off and another switches on. In my mind, this is the same process.
Which is something actually that brings us to the neon work and the confluence of what is a commercial medium and what is an artistic medium. Because neon signage is inherently commercial. That's the purpose that it is made for. You've made a lot of works in neon. Again, that's a series of works that has spanned a number of decades in your career. And you do some commercial signage work too. Which you also do. There are a number of these works on view in the studio, but
Just easier to do it like
much easier to do. So you do two series of works. One, which is the line works, which we see here. I think this is an installation of you from a solo show you had at Ken Saunders Gallery a few years ago.
Yeah, shout out to Ken Saunders for really supporting my neon work.
And these are single neon lines with text over the top that are done very, very well because you never see the bends in your work. There's never any paint outs. If you're familiar with the way neon is put together, not having paint outs creates a certain kind of legibility.
Except when I want to paint things out, or here's another example.
See again the use of text and the use of abstraction of language.
Okay, and maybe. In terms of abstraction,
The second series of works in neon, which actually seem to use repurposed parts of commercial signage. And
Right.
again, using type form or letter forms and typography and that abstraction.
yeah, I specifically make these works not to be read, as I was talking about earlier. Neon is it's an incredibly useful communication tool as to promote legibility. So I love the idea of thwarting the medium itself. It seems like a real punk rock thing to do. In fact, when we were doing our pre-Zoom check, our technician, when I showed this image, said, I think that's backwards. And it is backwards. It's intentionally backwards and upside down and flopped. And I love that. Language can be so authoritatively commanding. I always say it's almost impossible to not read something.
Compulsive. You see it, you read it. There's not two separate actions.
Goes back to the stop sign. It's a good thing language works the way it does. But as a kind of a punk rock artist destroyer, it's also a great part of the medium to fight against. I think Chris Wolf is an excellent example of someone who's just like taking a sledgehammer
Absolutely.
to legibility, to painting, to spray painting, to silk screening, to printing constantly. He's another one of those people who absolutely go on my pantheon of artistic whisperers.
Fair enough. So to wind things up, because we're getting near the end of the hour here, I do want to talk about Hand Heart, the work that is on view in Milwaukee. But that has an interesting life as a work, which very much I think is indicative of your entire practice. That is something that started as a painting, as a mural on the side of this building that we're in now, your studio on Chicago Avenue. And that had a companion, or really as part of the same work, had an image that was a flipped version of the hand with an eye rather than a heart.
Mhm.
That kind of spoke to the sensibility of being both highly legible as symbols that we all know. We know what a hand outline is, we know what an eye is, we know what a heart is, but taken together as a whole does not have an explicit interpretation that reads quite as easily. It also kind of harkens to this sense of cave paintings, of these very primitive, very early, very universally, there it is being painted. So this is an image that started this way as a two-dimensional painting on the wall. This mural has been painted out since the high-rise was built next to the building.
Yeah.
So it no longer exists in its initial form. And the hand eye has kind of been a work that ceased to exist as the hand heart carried forward. But you also then created something which is very akin to a sign that was steel and enamel.
Yeah.
And that's an addition that was available for some time. And I believe you have another work in the same series is derived from a series of works called the Icon series, and another work in the series
This one.
more recently is the one here, which is the Hourglass with the Wings, which takes the same graphic form and again has an almost commercial quality to its production. And it's still very much a two-dimensional object, but one that comes off of the wall now and is resting on the wall rather than being part and parcel with the wall. And this as an image is, again, something that is, you know, we know what an hourglass is, we know the symbolism of an hourglass of wings. You see this kind of iconography off
Life fleeting.
on cemetery gates or taphilic architecture, tombstones, tombs, crypts, things like that. So it is something that everyone has a relationship to or has an innate ability to read, but is still decontextualized, very much something that requires you to stop and think. It isn't the stop sign, it isn't that immediate interpretation. And you might have just seen these at Expo Chicago, and I believe one sold at Sotheby's in 2020. So this is an ongoing series of work, and this is some of your more current and commercially available work. And from this series then came Hand Heart,
Right, let's look
as
at
we know it in Milwaukee.
Great.
And as some of you may know, it as a little help in here.
Hand Heart.
So Hand Heart is on view in Catalano Square, and so we've seen with the realization of Hand Heart, this image come from a painted mural on a wall into 3 dimensions while retaining its element as a flat image as part of the Enamel Signworks Icon series, and then finally realized and scaled up, really scaled up and then scaled down and then scaled up again, because the mural is quite monumental. So again, seeing that radical shift in scale that you're known for. As an object, as a, not by any means your first work of public art, but your first work of public sculpture. And the first work that's kind of lived in a public sphere in this way that is just out in the world and not part of anything beyond itself, in the way that the Montrose station is very much part of the station, part of that environment. This is something that really just lives on its own.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about how you came to the desire to realize it in this way and what that experience has been like for you? Because we did fabricate this, I will say, Sculpture Milwaukee fabricated.
Didn't you just answer that question?
I very well could have. I think your answer would be better.
Well, I will try to answer that. Let's talk about the fabrication first. The wonderful thing about Hand Heart in person is how handmade it looks.
It does look very handmade.
It's not as smooth or as slick as much of my work can be, like the Hourglass, for example. Oh, it's heavy, it's metal. This is very slick, and I wanted this to be as sort of perfect as possible. But because of the scale of Hand Heart and our budget, because you got to work with a budget, the kind of buffing and rubbing and sanding and polyurethaning and resining that was necessary to make the sculpture leaves a certain patina, a certain surface, kind of touched surface that I grew to really love in the process. There's some designers who would have seen that, those modeling or modeled edges, and be like, no, 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 we can't have that. It's got to be perfect. It's got to be flat. And I was like, no, we should really embrace that. And I'm really glad we did. It makes the sculpture really feel absolutely unique, absolutely a one-off. I don't plan to ever make another one like that. And I'm glad that the time that went into the making of the work is visible on the surface of the work. That's real important. That has become very important.
And to that end, I do want to say thank you to Mike and his team at Illumination Studios here in Chicago. They took on the project, and I will say, as one of the members of the team tasked with finding a fabricator who was willing to work with an artist in a very collaborative manner, as you so often do. This was not just a commercial fabrication. This was not, here's what we want, send it off, have it made. This was a highly collaborative process, and it is a fiberglass sculpture. And as you said, fiberglass is a material that really shows the workmanship that goes into it. It has a very crafted quality to it, and it does from the distance read very cleanly, very legibly, very much almost in the same way that signage does, or in the same way that these smaller works in the series read. But when you get up to it, it does, again, play with scale and the scale to the body, and it does have, again, these human qualities creep into your work, no matter how slick and how clean and how much you want to abstract things. There's always a little bit of that tactile human quality to your work.
Guess I'm human after all.
I think that's a good place to end things. Thank you, Jason. We are pretty close to on time here. Thank you for welcoming us all into your studio. Thank you for taking on this format of the studio visit. Thank you for having your work in our show, for working with myself and Michelle and Theaster and the rest of our team to realize this. And as our designer, we certainly owe you a debt of gratitude there in many ways. And we're happy to have you back as our designer this year for the exhibition. So thank you for that, and thank you to everyone who joined us this evening and stuck with us through this and has asked us questions and taken an interest in the work and joined us this season. We'll return with more programming this fall with the new exhibition, Nature Doesn't Know About Us, curated by Hugo Ronznone. So stay tuned with Sculpture Milwaukee, and if you're in Chicago, I highly recommend looking Jason up for a studio visit so you can see the rest of what's on the walls here.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Bye, everybody.